1 week season.
Welcome everybody to Solo Ship Week 1, Season 4. I'm Squirrel Patrol from 444 Football. I'm joined by JM DeWin from 1 week season. JM, this is our 4th season together. I wanted to thank both you and my wife for dealing with all of my career changes. It's been a busy off season, but I'm excited to do this for the 4th year in a row. How was your off season?
Man, off season was great. Kind of hibernation mode. I started mid to late July of really diving into everything. Posted a bunch of stuff on X for 2 days in late July, early August. Thought I'd be on there a lot throughout the summer. Then things get busy with business and getting ready for the season and whatnot. But I didn't realize this was year 4, man. How cool is that? And last year we were I don't know if you recall this, but we were before the season. Aaron and I were talking about the power of my time, and we were like, should we cut out this solo ship show? And then I messaged I think I'm not doing it this year. And then I messaged back no, I got to do it. It's just such a valuable show for me. I don't care. I think people watch it these days. But I was like, I don't care how many people watch it. It's just a show I love doing. It's great to sit down and chat with you every week.
Yeah, I agree. I was actually listening to our season 1 or our week 1 show from last year to kind of refresh my mind on how we run things.
Oh yeah.
Week 1 last year, I said welcome to season 3. That's incredible. I could have just started season 2, and I could be adding a year to our.
We might be lying. Yeah, this might all be inaccurate, but
assuming everything's up to date with the season number. Going into this week, we got a 12-game slate. I think there's no wrong answers this week for a bunch of reasons. But every game has a total between 42.5 and 47.5. Every game except for one has a total between 42.5 and 47.5. Every spread but one is at 6 points or less. Any initial thoughts on the slate?
Yeah, I do think there's some games that stand out to me. One of the reasons I really like this show so much is I'm kind of a bubble builder, right? So I'm in my own world and in my own thoughts, and then I come out on Fridays and I do a show with Pete Overzet in the morning, and I kind of get from him the perspective of what everyone's talking about, because that's sort of where Pete's where Pete's centered in the industry is, right? What are the conversations and what is everybody talking about this week? And sometimes there's some topics and I'm I didn't realize people were so focused on that, or I didn't know people were going to like this player that much. And then you and I get together and you've had so much success in DFS, also thinking independently and thinking for yourself. So there's always these spots where our thoughts overlap. And then there's a few things you see that it's oh, I didn't see that, And so I think it's such a cool dynamic here. And I'm really excited to dive in and see what you're seeing on the slate. I like what you said about no wrong answers, because we get so certain about what's going to happen. And then we watch a game like Thursday Night Football where nobody expected the first part of the game to play out the way it did, where nobody could stop anybody. Nobody expected the second part of the game to play out the way it did, where nobody could do anything on offense. And nobody expected Javonte Williams to score 2 touchdowns, George Pickens to have 3 catches, AJ Brown to have 1 catch 58 minutes into the game. We see that, and then we let go of all of that heading into Sunday. We're we know what's going to happen in these 12 games, but it's no, there's going to be a lot of surprises this week.
Yeah, I love that they start, with Thursday Night Football, and then we get Friday Night Football from Brazil this week as well. But because for the exact reason that you just mentioned, watching Javonte, I said on the show this morning, I said everybody's got a plan until Javonte Williams punches in 2 touchdowns, in the first game of the season. It's we thought we knew everything. We don't know anything. My analogy, I think I've used it before in the show during week 1 shows, but I always like to look back at my home league round 1 of our fantasy football draft and look at all of the picks that flubbed. People could have taken anybody in the first 10, 12 picks, and they take these guys that end up putting up duds for the whole season. And it just reminds us that even on a season-long basis, it's so hard to know what's going to happen in NFL football. And then you have the variance of a 1 week, a 1 week season.
Yeah,
it gets even harder to predict what's going to happen. But we now the industry has evolved to have these projections. We're very certain in these projections that they get more and more accurate all the time. But they also tend to be very similar. And when they're off, they can all be way off, not just off by a little bit.
Yeah. I was running some sims on some hand builds this morning and last night. And it was there was somewhere it was negative ROI. And it was like, but is it, like there's so much we don't know in week one in terms of how to project some of these situations and players. There was one roster where like the difference between me having Hunter Renfrow and Ricky Pearsall was like my highest ROI roster. And then I switched those two spots, like two other guys in the same price ranges. Right. And it was negative ROI. And it's like, my biggest edge is like week 4 or 5 on, right, where I get more information. But week one, I think inherently, like if you can let go of the idea of knowing what you know, then you have more you have more edge, right?
Yeah, I think so. I will say that this week things are a little bit more spread out, but we'll see how things evolve. Like I don't think ownership is necessarily going to like concentrate anywhere too strongly this week, which might take away some of that edge, right? Because like when people get really invested in the clear plays on Friday, that ownership can get like can kind of snowball, get a little bit bigger than than we were expecting this week. I'm not sure that I see that happening. Although I will say, we record this on Friday afternoons. We usually get injury reports coming at us from Friday practices. We could have a big one this week with Christian McCaffrey either having a normal Veterans Day off on Thursday practice, or it could be a recurrence of last season where he was declared out, I think, a few hours before game time after people thought it was just like a nagging thing where he was going to be able to play through it. He ended up missing, I think, the first 9 weeks of the season. And I think that's going to be a big impact because Christian McCaffrey is only $7,300 on DraftKings this week, which is about $2,000 to $3,000 less than he's been priced at previously.
Yeah, that's a big one. And it's also going to be interesting to see what the fallout is if he's out. Like, how much do people then click over to mid-season brain where they're like, his backup running back, everybody's going to play him? Or do people say, hey, there's like still a lot of value and great places to go on this slate and go other directions?
Yeah, so I'll just note that his player props are still out there, as are the player props for the rest of the San Francisco 49ers, which to me indicates the expectation is that he's going to play. And the receiving yards for George Kittle did not spike dramatically with the news that Christian McCaffrey missed Thursday's practice. So I think that at least maybe the sports books that are leaving lines out there that people can bet on are expecting Christian McCaffrey to likely play. And if he does play, I think I'll lean into playing, historically one of the best scorers in fantasy football history at just $7,300 when other people might be a little bit scared to play him given the injury history.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I mean, I did argue there for a couple of years that he was overpriced, right? When he was up at his like $8K plus price tag, just because his role with the 49ers is not what it was with the Panthers. But at $7,300, I think he's underpriced. And so, yeah, to me, he stands out as definitely one of the stronger, because this is technically this is a single entry show, right? And so we try to get down to what are some of the sharper plays on the slate? What are some of the plays that we feel like, oh, I'm building this stack, but who am I plugging in around that stack? And I think he certainly fits into that bucket. And yeah, there's a few others too. To me, this Bucks and Falcons game is I think if we played out this slate 100 times, it would top the slate in terms of total scoring more than any other game. And then it's such a concentrated offense that you can go through the numbers of when Evans and Godwin were out there, and then Evans and Jalen McMillan last year, the consistency of scoring from at least one Bucks wideout and often two is so high that I think that's another spot where I try to avoid these. Last year, Marvin Harrison Jr. put up 1.4 points in week one at $7K salary and high ownership. Last year, Malik Neighbors put up 11 points in week one. I try to avoid these popular rookie wide receivers in their first ever career game, but I do think Emeka Egbuka is an exception here because of the way that this Bucks offense runs.
Yeah. So you articulated my concerns and then made the exception that I wanted to make because I agree. I always think about these are billion-dollar companies. NFL teams now are billion-dollar corporations. You would never expect a 21 or 22-year-old walk into IBM, change everything around. Starting on day one. I think about my first week as a professional. Working somewhere right after college. Right. I would not want people putting their DFS software consulting dollars behind my my performance in week one. But the NFL is a little bit different. But yeah, you talk about like Marvin Harrison Jr. I remember he was popular week 1 last season. Malik Neighbors, like they both kind of disappointed. But Mika Ibuka, like there's been some things that have kind of changed since the price was set at just 4,600. We saw Chris Godwin, I think is still doubtful, but he's almost certainly not going to play. So like that leaves a big opening for Ibuka. And yeah, just $4,600. I think this is my second favorite game environment. The guy I like from this game is Drake London. He was underpriced, I think, at $6,500. Tampa Bay gave up the most receptions in the league last year, and so and he put up I think 117 yards, 187 yards in Week 18 with Michael Penix and 2 touchdowns on 10 receptions. I know like Drake London, if I recall, is a guy you haven't been high on in the past. What do you think about adding Drake to the Atlanta Tampa Bay mix?
Yeah, so Drake London, it's the Keenan Allen, the Michael Pittmans, the Drake Londons. It's like the guys who, in order to hit, they need heavy volume, right? And so, if I have one of those guys and it's a game where I don't see the heavy volume flowing their way, then I avoid them because they tend to be rostered at such a high rate because they're consistently getting double-digit DraftKings points. People love that. So yeah, no, this is a week where Drake London, he's not like the full-on exception for me this week. Like I still think this number is off the top of my head, so I might be wrong on like the specifics of it. But like Mike Evans scored 17 plus points in half his games last year. And I think Drake London did it in like 2 games or 3 games or something like just the consistency with which you get those scores from somebody like Mike Evans at the same price tag. I still take him first because he's such a focal point of the offense. But no, I think that Drake London's a super sharp play this week. I've got him below like those Bucs guys, but I will have plenty of them this week.
Yeah, there is a lot to like from this game because I think you've either got a very cheap Ibuka at 4,600. You can play Drake London at 6,500, but I agree. I think Mike Evans is a name that's not going to be played as often as he should because if people are going to think it looks weird, they're going to want to play Ibuka. But they're going to think it looks weird if you have $2 in the lineup. But yeah, he's competing right there with Drake London at Evans is 6,600, Drake London is 6,500. You could play all 3 of them and play stack from this game. That's a big bet on the environment really taking off, but I think it's a bet that can pay off. And we've seen that game stacking has been a way to get your lineups to the top when an entire game takes off. I guess what are your thoughts on the quarterbacks like Baker Mayfield and Michael Penix? Are you willing to play them as part of a stack relative to other?
Yeah, okay, so take Baker, and this is actually I think an interesting discussion and what I'm like interested to have with you because you're so sharp on quarterbacks and running quarterbacks, right? But Jayden Daniels last year, he didn't bring a pairing partner with him like all season. So you're playing him and getting like one spot on your roster, right? Baker Mayfield had more points per game than Jayden Daniels last year. He had more games of like, I think it was 26 plus or 28 plus DraftKings points, twice as many games as Jayden Daniels last year. And if you get Baker right, like the games where Baker's putting up 28, 30, 35, like you're getting 3 spots right? So the math on getting 3 spots right, let's say it happens 15% of the time, right? That you get Baker plus Ibuka plus Mike Evans right. Well, like getting Jayden Daniels right and another guy right and another guy right that are all going to happen, say 25% of the time, like the chance of getting all those together is sub 2%, right? 3 uncorrelated plays. And so like, even if Baker would only hit once per season, like 5%, 6% of the time, it would be like much better math to me than Jayden Daniels plus 2 one-offs like at other positions, right? If you're not pairing Jayden Daniels with somebody. So yeah, just curious your thoughts. I love Baker Mayfield this week in the spot. And I think Michael Penix is a really great play as well.
I do. So yeah, I like Mayfield. I like Mayfield in this game over Penix. It's a little bit tough to know who to pair Penix with, like if you want multiple receivers from the Falcons, but that's one of the reasons I like Drake London. So I agree. I think maybe playing like Baker with multiple Bucs receivers can add Cade Otton to that mix. Who looks like he's going to play at the tight end position, and then you have Drake London as like an Atlanta one-off. Yeah, I know. I think that's a good way to play it. I'm a little bit hesitant. Baker's pretty pricey at 6,600. and that's tough if you're not getting the rushing points. And I don't know. Yeah, there's a lot of cheaper quarterbacks as well they're attempting to go with, but it's true. Like when Baker has put up a big score in the past, like he has put up 25 or more points, which it seems like it's difficult for a non-rushing quarterback to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And now they did ban smelling salts in the NFL. Did you know that?
Yeah.
Like, I guess something that Baker would do like before every series would like hit those smelling salts. And I guess George Kittle does it before every play.
I do it before every show.
So. Body, so yeah, it's not illegal for us. So we're still there. But yeah, to me, this game and this quarterback situation is one that I want to be on for sure, like on a big chunk of my rosters and a big chunk of my single entry 3-max builds personally. Who are some of the cheap quarterbacks that you're?
So I said this is maybe my second favorite game environment, and the one that I like probably about as much or maybe even more is actually Miami and Indianapolis. I'm going to be playing some Daniel Jones this week. Just because he's $1,500 cheaper than Baker at $5,100. He adds some rushing ability. It's an indoor environment. I like the number of explosive players in this game. Tyreek Hill, Devin Achane. If you want to add like Michael Pittman, Josh Downs to that game, I guess Alec Pierce, potentially Adonai Mitchell. But yeah, I think there's a lot of explosive players in this game, which is what you want, right? Like you want like Tyreek Hill getting the ball, running 80 yards downfield, or you want Jonathan Taylor, right? Running 75 yards down the field and turning the ball over to the opposing offense. And so, yeah, I like this game and environment. I probably like Daniel Jones significantly more than Tua. So yeah, that's one of the games I'm looking at, and that might be my favorite game environment of the week.
Yeah, no, I like that game. That one. I really like Tyreek and Achane in that game. I like Josh Downs. I like Jonathan Taylor. I haven't been able to bring myself to like actually build a Daniel Jones roster yet. I built some Tua practice builds, but yeah, like I think when I was mapping out exposures, like early just ideas, I put in like 10% Tua and 5% Daniel Jones for MME. And it was like my quarterback exposures added up to like 140%. So it was like, okay, I'm going to have to get this down, right? So maybe something like 7% Tua and 4% Daniel Jones. But I haven't been able to bring myself to tighter builds. I mean, but yeah, sometimes knowing too much is a bad thing. You know what I mean? Like, okay, like he's going to have a solid game. He's going to produce some stats for his offense. I think this game can put points, but like, I don't think he's going to do. But then it's like, then Javonte Williams has 2 touchdowns. So I think he's a guy I want to account for. I've had a hard time bringing myself toward him for like single entry, but I certainly don't hate the call. We're talking about running quarterbacks, right? That people aren't going to be on. For me, man, when I get down to these cheaper ranges, it's been Flacco and Njoku because like Flacco, it was like 300 plus yards in like 10 of his last 12 starts, and like all 6 of his starts with the Browns a couple of years ago were over 250 or over 270. And he and Njoku, like their 6 games a couple of years ago, they combined for 20 points once, like 34 points another, and 40 plus in the other 4 games, including a couple of games over 50. So it's like at 9.6K, that one stands out to me against the Bengals, where we think the Bengals will score points. We think they'll still be bad against tight ends. We think the Browns will still let Flacco just go out there and sling it around. Have you gone there at all in your builds?
So the 4-for-4 optimal lineup, if you just run the optimal lineup, it's a Joe Flacco, David Njoku stack, which makes me a little bit concerned. Because I think Joe Flacco, there's 2 directions this could go. One is that Joe Flacco is just a good play, and that people are not going to want to put him into their rosters because like people are fresh off redrafting, like their redraft seasons, their home leagues. Like nobody's taking like Joe Flacco in best ball, right? But like he's a really good DFS play this week. So it's going to be really interesting to see like how much of the casual interest is still in DFS. Because like Joe Flacco is the highest owned quarterback this week. Because I think he is going to project really well for the price. And I think the issue is that game's going to be popular. If you play Joe Flacco and you're building some rules into your optimizer, right? Like it's going to give you all those Bengals pieces, but with the cheaper Joe Flacco over Joe Burrow. And it's going to give you a very cheap David Njoku at tight end. But but it'll be interesting because I don't think the casual football fan did. Oh yeah, Joe Flacco, that's like definitely my number one quarterback. Going into this week. So I don't know if it's a sharp play or if it's going to be overplayed by sharp players. What's left in DFS in 2025. But yeah, I don't know. We'll see. I'll say I think that's like a big difference between DraftKings and FanDuel, just to show a little FanDuel love. I think on FanDuel, like you can definitely get away with the more expensive tight ends and more expensive quarterbacks. Or on DraftKings, you really want that correlation and that value that comes from like pairing a cheap quarterback with a cheap tight end like Flacco and Njoku.
Yeah. Baker and Flacco are kind of like my two core guys. And then I'll have I don't know, 50, 60% of my rosters currently thinking will be on those two. And then I'll have like another 40 or 50% to play around with other guys. But a lot of time still between now and kickoff to change my mind on those things.
Yeah. So we touched on one rookie receiver already with, in Tampa Bay, Emeka Egbuka. There's another one I think is going to be, seeing some ownership this weekend. Ted McMillan with Carolina. That's another pretty good game environment. We should touch on the Carolina defense gave up by far the most points in the NFL per game last season, as well as by far, I think 15 yards per game more than any other defense in the NFL. They're facing a Jacksonville offense that made some improvements this year, including Travis Hunter, the number 2 pick in the draft. What do you think about McMillan and that whole game environment?
Yeah, I think Ted McMillan's probably going to put up like somewhere between 8 and 17 DraftKings points, and it's going to be on like 30% of rosters at 5,200. You know what I mean? So I like the game environment. I don't know how to value Bryce Young in DFS because he's thrown for more than 263 yards twice in his career, and it can happen like 8 times this season, right? Players take a step forward. And I think he's a good NFL quarterback, but I think he's a limited NFL quarterback. He had like 2 monster DFS games across the last 3 weeks last year, but they were like built off of rushing touchdowns. So yeah, I still this feels fragile to me, right? When the field is really excited about playing a guy at high ownership who's never played an NFL game in an offense that like people weren't excited to play anybody from last year. That feels like Marquez Callaway a few years ago, right? Where you're like, oh, if everybody's going to do this, yeah, like I'll go a different direction. Marvin Harrison Jr. last year, I don't think he's going to put up 1.4 points, but like it's going to be, I think he's an underdog to put up like a score you had to have at his price tag. And so to me, that makes it easier for me to stay away. But I will have like Trevor Lawrence is kind of right there on the fringe of being like my next quarterback, behind those first 2 guys. And if I'm building, like I want to build for a scenario where like Trevor Lawrence isn't throwing for 250 and 2 touchdowns, right? Like what if Trevor Lawrence throws for 304 touchdowns and then you've got like 2 or 3 wide receivers on his team. And then you've got somebody from the other side. Like that's where my Ted McMillan exposure, I think will come, is like betting on the game environment taking off. I don't think I'll have Ted McMillan onesies just because it's like, it does feel fragile. I mean, you think I'm seeing that wrong, or are you with me on that?
No, I think that's a good call. I'll say just on Bryce Young, one of those games, actually is a game he threw for 150 yards, but he won me $1 million. He was the quarterback in my million maker lineup. But I agree. I think Ted McMillan actually fits the Marvin Harrison role pretty well from last year, where there's just really high expectations. And, the Jalen Coker injury is probably adding to people's expectations because like, they're down a receiver now, but they're still going to have somebody playing that role, right? Like I think maybe like Hunter Renfrow, yeah. Yeah. So there'll still be somebody there playing that, like, I guess, Adam Thielen role from last year. I have more confidence in Egbuka at 4,600 than I do with McMillan at 5,200. And I like the idea of getting some exposure through game stacks, right? Like if Brian Thomas is taking off, if Trevor Lawrence is taking off, then that's a possibility. Then Carolina really got to throw the ball, and then McMillan could have a good game. I'll say as a side note, Jacksonville added a new offensive coordinator this past offseason. And I was looking him up, and he was born my junior year of college, and he's an NFL offensive coordinator. So congratulations to him, and hopefully he's bringing a fresh new mindset to the Jags offense this season.
That's pretty wild. Yeah, the game environment I do think is interesting. I just think that like that's the way to play it. I'm not saying like for any of you watching, maybe you never watched this before, like none of this is saying don't play this guy. We're just talking math and like what makes us the most money over time. And I think like it's not going to be surprising at all if Ted McMillan goes out and puts up 26 or 27 points. But I think that his chances of doing that are much lower than ownership is going to imply. And I think that we'd make more money over time, like playing him with a bet on the game environment as opposed to, but this is still a game where you can like say, oh, Chuba Hubbard could, like, I think there's going to be enough points here pretty confidently that you're going to get solid scores with some upside, right? So like Chuba Hubbard and Brian Thomas Jr.'s, this one's weird. And I don't know how to value this. All of Brian Thomas Jr.'s, like he caught fire down the stretch, right? They started giving him 10 plus targets. Early in the first half of the season, it was like 7 targets, 8 targets, 5 targets. You're like, what are you guys doing? This guy's amazing. And then back half of the season, it was double digits every game. That was all Mac Jones, right? I do have like a little bit of curiosity of like, how do we value that? Is Trevor Lawrence going to give him double digit targets? I think that the way to approach is just say yes and then be proven wrong, right? Because I do think he's top of slate type of upside. But he's not like somebody I'm not like going out of my way to be like, oh, I got to get a ton of him, but I'm definitely going to have probably more than the field has on him.
Actually, I think that's a good point because I think people are forgetting that like how much Mac Jones played last season. Like I'm looking at Drake London and saying, oh, I like the idea. I like the fact that he kind of took off just a handful of games at the end of the season when Michael Penix, was playing. But yeah, you've got almost the reverse of that in Jacksonville, where you have this like player that put up a really big season last year, but it was with a different quarterback. Now it's a quarterback we generally might look at and think, oh, well, Trevor Lawrence is going to be much better. But Trevor Lawrence might be better, but also kind of different, and not throw to Brian Thomas as much. They have the number 2 pick in the draft playing wide receiver on their offense. So that's potentially something we want to consider.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is definitely a spot where it's like, I'm going to make sure I have exposure to game stacks. I'm going to make sure I have some one-offs from these offenses, primarily focused on Chuba Hubbard and Brian Thomas Jr., but like allowing myself to be like, oh, Brian Thomas Jr. doesn't fit on this roster, but Travis Hunter does. Or, oh, you know what I could do? I could play Tank Bigsby here and hope that he gets 14 or 16 carries and 2 touchdowns. And like that opens up things on other spots of my roster here, right? Like that's kind of how I will approach things with this game. But it's not going to be flooding into as many of my rosters as like the Bucs and Falcons spot or even like the Dolphins players who I will kind of have flooding into more spots than I think players from this game.
So we've touched on, I think, all of the like 47.5 point, 47 point games, except for one, which is a little bit of a surprisingly high total for you in Green Bay. The Lions and the Packers at 47.5. You've got Jordan Love there. You have Jayden Reed potentially a little bit injured. We have Matthew Golden stepping in. Christian Watson is still expected to miss most of this year, I believe. And then we have a Detroit offense that's returning most of the same pieces from last season. And they're getting a big piece back on defense, Aiden Hutchinson back from injury. But it's a game that's not really being talked about that much for DFS. Do you have any thoughts on the game there in Green Bay?
Yeah. So when I initially sorted through stuff this week, I did it before looking at over-unders, and I grouped this. This is like the one game that I grouped below those other 4 games that have the 47.5, 48.5, or 46.5 to 48.5 total. So like, including the Dolphins and Colts game. Like I had those first 4 games, and then this was in a second tier that ended up falling in with like the Rams and Texans and the 49ers and Seahawks, which are games that like ended up with lower totals. So yeah, I'm with you. Like that's kind of how I was seeing this game. 2 of the last 3 games between these teams in Green Bay have been like under 40 points combined. And there's a difference like in Green Bay because it's grass versus turf, it's outdoor versus indoor. And they do actually let the grass grow a little bit longer there, which kind of slows down teams. That's a true thing. And so, and then you've got really high priced players on the Lions and then kind of uncertain distribution of touches on the Packers. And so it just leaves me in a spot where it's like, how often does this become a spot where you couldn't win a tournament without these guys? I don't think that. And speaking of like going back through game logs, right, of who was playing, who wasn't, like Jahmyr Gibbs, you look back and you're like, man, this dude caught fire last year. And then you realize most of his huge games where David Montgomery was out, so he's capable of a huge game, but he's far less likely than just the game logs look like. And so, it's not a game I'm super nervous to miss out on. Like, I don't think there's a high probability of of us flipping things open on Sunday evening and being like, oh God, there was no way to win without having pieces from this game. I think we could get some good scores, but I don't think it's going to be like difference making, like in the typical range of outcomes.
Yeah, I kind of see it the same way. I just think a lot of Detroit's games last year, like they offense did incredibly well when they needed to, right? But they don't necessarily want to go out there looking to score 40 points, right? They're not thinking we need to go throw the ball all over the field. Um, they would prefer to win games, I think, with their defense. This seems like a divisional clash that I guess the on average it might score about 47 points, but it seems much more like a 24-23 to me, than a game where one of the offenses can go out and and score 35 points or 42 points, right? And they're winning 42-6 and arriving around the same total.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. I'm surprised. So we've made it 32 minutes in. You haven't talked about Jayden Daniels at all.
Yeah, I think he's a great play on FanDuel. More so than on FanDuel. It might just be that I'm mentally preparing to get most of my exposure to him on FanDuel, where the 6-point rushing touchdowns count a lot more when you're only dealing with a half point per reception. There's so much to like on DraftKings this week, but we do have the salary, and there's so much to like at the quarterback position at the cheaper price ranges. But we have the salary to spend up. If Tyreek Hill is priced under 7,000 and Christian McCaffrey is just 7,300, why are we not putting up like a quarterback that had such huge games last year? I think he averaged like 23 DraftKings points per game in games that he finished. Like if you look at his seasonal averages, it's important to remember like I think he missed almost the entire Carolina game against Carolina, and then he just played sparingly in week 18. So all of his numbers were really put up in less games than it looks like. I like Jayden Daniels, and I'll be playing some Jayden Daniels. There's a good chance that if I play Jayden Daniels, I'll be pairing him with like Malik Neighbors, and then just trying to stack another one of these games in that line. I probably prefer Deebo Samuel if I'm going to pair him with a Commanders player, maybe even Austin Eckler at 4,800, although it doesn't seem like one of those kinds of games for Washington. But I like the Jayden Daniels Malik Neighbors pairing probably most of all from that game, and then stacking the Indianapolis Miami game or stacking the Atlanta Tampa Bay game around that shell, and you're just using Jayden Daniels instead of Baker Mayfield.
Yeah, I like that. The Baker one, because their prices is close, is actually kind of interesting. Or if you do it over the Colts and Dolphins, which you throw on Jonathan Taylor, and so then you're saying that the Colts get their points through the ground and then their touchdowns through the ground, but it's still high scoring. And and I think those are things you got to think about with Jayden Daniels, because again, there's the track record isn't there of him bringing a pairing partner with him. So then the math benefit of getting, you get like 35 points, but on one spot, and you don't get to correlate that with anything. Whereas if something else, you get a quarterback with 28, but you bring two guys with you, that's actually worth more, which is kind of counterintuitive, but you make more money over time that way. So, but yeah, I like those thoughts on how to play Jayden Daniels. I think the Giants defense is going to be good. I think they're going to be a pain in the butt to play. And so, I don't see it as and he's right now, Jayden's projecting for high ownership. So it's not a spot that I'm like, oh, I've got to get there. He could put up 26 or 27. I think he's gonna have a hard time putting up 35 to 38 unless the game environment takes off, which is where you say, okay, I've got to get Malik Neighbors in there. I don't think I would play Jayden without a piece from the Giants, because I think it has to be high scoring back and forth for him to actually be a guy you had to have. I think you put up a solid score without the game environment cooperating, but a solid score at a onesie spot where you're not getting stacking partners. I'm not really that anxious to get to that. But if it's oh, this game takes off, you had to have Jayden Daniels. Malik Neighbors probably is benefiting. So yeah, definitely like that shout there.
There's one game I wanted to bring up that we haven't touched on yet. It's one with the cheapest quarterback of all, Spencer Rattler. Any thoughts on the Saints and Cardinals? We should note that last season the Saints actually put up, I think, 47 points in week 1. It was more than the game total they put up just on offense, which nobody would have expected. There's some things I like about this game. One is just the unexpected, and some of it the unexpected is really on the Saints side. We don't necessarily know how they're going to perform this season. Last year ended up in a pretty poor fashion, but they have some talented receivers. With Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed. Those are two guys we've liked to play throughout the years. And I really like the concentrated nature of the Cardinals offense as well. We can play Trey McBride, and we know he had 49 more receptions than Marvin Harrison last season. So we know that they're going to get the ball to Trey McBride. They have James Conner as well. You can throw Alvin Kamara in there. He gets the point per reception. Any thoughts on the Cardinals and Saints?
Yeah, I think it's a super sharp place to go because perception, right? Like there's so much negativity around the Saints that they're almost invisible when you first flip open the app. And now I've thought about this game enough that I've forgotten that it's probably invisible to most people, but like most people are just going to overlook it, right? And then I just like ran a run in the optimizer the other night, no parameter set, 25 rosters, and it spit out a Kyler McBride, Marvin Harrison Jr. roster. And I started thinking about it and realizing like, oh my gosh, this is something I was preaching last year, that you can play these three together because 3 times last year they hit, like that group, because they're so concentrated. 3 times last year that group hit. One time it was like 3.6x their combined salary, and the other 2 times it was like 4.2, 4.5. And it's like when Kyler hits, he's bringing 1 or 2 guys with him. And people aren't going to play that stack, And so, yeah, I do think that stack is really interesting. Like that's kind of battling with the Trevor Lawrence one as like my 3rd favorite quarterback stack to go with. And then I think that playing through the Saints, I haven't built any Spencer Rattler rosters. I'm sure I'll have like a little bit in mass multi-entry, like large field mass multi-entry. He won't approach my tighter builds, but Kamara will approach my tighter builds. Rashid Shaheed will approach my tighter builds, maybe even Chris Olave. And I think Rashid Shaheed's 4,600, right? So you've got Josh Downs, Ricky Pearsall, Emeka Ibuka. Like nobody's playing Rashid Shaheed. This dude scored like 16 to 20 in 4 of his 5 healthy games last year, right? Kamara only had 5 games with both Olave and Shaheed. They're all at the beginning of the season when he's going to have fresher legs. And those were 3 of his best games of the season came in those spots. So yeah, I do think like this is one of those spots where new head coach, bad quarterback, like I think the perceptions are so negative that people forget like, oh, this is still an NFL team that's going to come out and try to win this game. Things can happen here. Yeah, I think it's a very interesting spot.
Yeah, I don't know if I'll go there for single entry, which is the theme of the show that I remember every once in a while. But I think it's a really interesting call, for multi-entry. I think you could take aspects of it for single entry, right? You could do a James Conner, Kamara or Shaheed pairing. I agree. Shaheed is a really interesting price pivot, right, at 4,600, because Ibuka is probably going to be fairly popular. People are not going to go to Shaheed as much. Josh Downs also probably going to be somewhat popular. All right, that'll pretty much do it for this week. Any closing thoughts?
No, I am so excited we're doing the show again. Appreciate you and your time and these conversations. Looking forward to the rest of the season.
Yeah. Good luck to everybody this weekend, and we will see you next week.